All right, this is the portion of the afternoon where we're calling for some audience participation. This is your opportunity to pitch in your 2 cents. And with 170 of you, that makes 340 cents. In addition to the $10 we'll make off of the hotel key, that means we've netted about $13.40 for the conference, so we really appreciate that. This session is going to be open to discussion, really on all topics that have to do with restoring the West. We're looking for an open discourse that would lead towards, as Jeff says, collaborative learning. We are looking for an open discourse, but we would remind you to maybe heed some of the words of Dr. Provenza from this morning. Love your enemy. We want to use this time to help define some of the issues that have been brought up here today, and also to generate some ideas for research and adaptive management that may help us lead to solutions. So the objective of this year's Restoring the West is to bring together scientists, managers, and policymakers to take an in-depth look at plant and animal conflicts. Our speakers today have given us a better understanding of the biological and ecological constraints faced by plants and animals, as well as some of the political constraints and policy constraints that are faced by the managers of those plants and animals. As our speakers have pointed out, we in the West primarily manage public resources on public lands for multiple publics. So as ecologists, we know we should manage for proper ecological function across the landscape, but we also want to manage for wildlife. No howling, please. Some of us are not comfortable with that. So we know we also want to manage for these wildlife, including game, including threatened and endangered species, and including animal biodiversity. So here is where we run into the conflicts in managing plants and animals. There's a student, Amy Vandevoort, who presented a paper here looking at Lewis's woodpecker use of aspen. She's also a Division Wildlife Resources biologist. And Lewis's woodpeckers, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, are a state wildlife action plan species. So it's a species the state is very interested in. We found that we didn't know these species occurred in aspen until about 7 years ago when we found them in aspen. And what some of Amy's research has shown is what they're using is what we would call old growth aspen or decadent aspen. You can pick your loaded term, whichever one you like. These are open stands of aspen with large DBH trees. As we've talked about this, as Amy's preparing her thesis, we're left sort of with a management conundrum. So if we don't restore these stands, eventually the aspen is going to die out and the Lewis's woodpeckers are gone. Well, the strategy to restore decadent stands is to cut down the trees and let the aspen regenerate. And if we do that, the Lewis's woodpeckers are gone. We have a number of other management conundrums that have come up, I think, during our discussions this morning. I think one in particular, and this is the one I would like to start off our discussion with, is can elk have their aspen and eat it too? So those of you who are working in elk management or aspen management, what do you think? Somebody from the Division of Wildlife Resources who manages elk. One of the things that Marty had mentioned, actually, he showed all these small patches of aspen that was treated and fenced. And everything outside the fence was eaten, everything inside the fence wasn't eaten. Seems like if we're going to do that across the western landscape, we're going to have a lot of fence up there and a lot of very small patches of aspen. What alternatives do we have? Pardon? More wolves?
There's one sort of anecdotal case in the Bighorns in Wyoming where a rancher on public land and private land is putting out trace mineral rocks with micronutrients, and he claims as long as he keeps those well distributed, his cows are not eating aspen as readily as if he removes it. So we have a proposal to maybe further that a little bit more with science rather than one rancher and his thoughts and us looking at the site and saying, might be true. But anyway, it's a thought. The other one is, it's genetically alter the elk versus genetically, rather than research the genetics of aspen, figure out which individual elk would eat aspen and shoot more of those.
Is that the way wolves pick how to call the elk out of the herd? Okay, so nutrient blocks, other suggestions?
A number of years ago, I gave a paper in Jackson Hole about the possibility of managing elk in, of all places, the park up there where we had staying many of them. They were eating their way out across the home. And I suggested and really antagonized at least one person when the Wyoming Game and Fish, and he walked out of the room. I suggested that we realize there's a time variable in here, that you could shoot basically 90%, 80%, whatever would be appropriate, of the herd off in any given area. You could manage it very carefully by individual areas, and then let the aspen regenerate on their own. You don't have to fence them. And that you could move it around through the countryside, and perhaps you would be able to have your elk and your aspen too. That they could have their aspen and eat it too. In other words, don't eat all the cake at one time. Give it a chance to regenerate and come out with a new cake. Has anyone ever tested that? I don't believe they have. Like I said, that was a number of years ago. I'm an old-timer. I came back here and I haven't seen that to this day actually used. It was Michael and myself who got the numbers together of what might happen.
Is anybody aware of that's been tested? So Dale suggested that the Canadians are doing that, and we'll see if we can transport it south or not.
I just want to make an observation. I think somebody touched on it earlier in terms of exposures. I'm trying to say this at every meeting I go to. An exposure is an all or nothing prospect. What's inside the exposure is probably not much more natural than what's outside the exposure. It's very illustrative, and we get a good idea of what's going on, but it's nothing like some quote-unquote natural level of browse. It just shows you that there's that potential there. So maybe just to be provocative, we need to sort of think about that and put that out there in this discussion as well.
Yeah, I'm back.
If we look at what we can determine from dendrochronological work with aspen back in time, the aspen recruitment has been false. Even though probably suckering for regeneration is relatively constant, actual success, even before current management practices, was spaced periodically through time, and there may be a number of factors that were involved with that, from climate, from cyclic patterns in herbivore numbers, due to hunting or whatever other processes that were going on. But the point is that success in regeneration was never, as far as aspen is concerned, we don't need to think of it in terms of something that is all consistently taking place all the time. Aspen is long-lived enough that if it can get a successful regeneration event every, and you guys tell me how many years it's got to be, whether it's 40 or 50 or 70 or 80, whatever the year period needs to be, then you can continue to have aspen on a site, and as the gentleman suggested, have elk at least a large proportion of the time as well.
Yes.
I actually would throw this maybe at Fred Benza and see if are elk able to learn like sheep and cattle, and so can we use conditioning and food aversion to convince them that aspen is no good, and how might that be done?
And I would think that they would be able to learn really quickly based on that. One of the things that occurs to me, going back to the mineral supplement idea, as I've roamed around the hills looking and then eating aspen bark and stuff, good there's a nutrient farm, but it's got a diverse secondary chemistry that could be providing a whole bunch of benefits that no one's thinking about. From protein bypass, relieving headaches, there's a lot that's in that might be interesting to look at just from a little bit more of a basic standpoint by people like you. But, to give some idea of what are they getting out of it that makes sense. So there's domestic animals and wild, and then maybe from a little bit more of an informed standpoint, from that standpoint, if a person wanted to formulate something in an area to use it.
Yes?
Well, move the elk away from the aspen. What benefits do they get? What consequences does that bring? Do we perhaps have too many aspens considering too many elk, considering all of the pressures on the land that everybody occupies?
I think one of the points that Marty had brought up earlier is that the elk all kind of focusing on the aspen, but there's also nothing else out there for them to eat. There's not a lot of bitterbrush or the other things that he suggested they may be able to move over to get them out of some of the aspen. Yes?
Well, I've got a couple of observations. One, 2 falls ago, I was on a trip from the Lamar up Slough Creek into the historic Veracruz wilderness. And that whole country was burned in 1988. With moose and elk winter range. Been looked at for moose since the 1940s, so the very first looking on them. And when you look at the slopes, and this is both National Forest and Yellowstone Park. You look at the slopes that are facing west, you see a mix of regenerating lodgepole and aspen. And when I was in there, the aspen were in color, so they really covered the whole thing. And talking to Bill Ripple today about it, those had to be seeded in. And they were also, they were basically released. They were going to be part of the mature stands in there. So that was part of that big 1988 fire that they had. That was the Storm King fire. And obviously there was no aspen in that lodgepole forest before. There was never known there was anything else there. Then last summer, along the middle fork of the Salmon, down on Elk Winter Range, I was on a boat trip, and at the Indian Creek, there's a hall outside there that you can get out and look around. If you look across on Elk Winter Range, you see about 5 acres of aspen regenerate. And again, I'll talk about that tomorrow. That's part of the fire that went through that country in the 2000s. And it's at least a 5-acre stand. It's very often. So once again, if there was any aspen in there before, wasn't very noticeable. The thing about this that leads me to believe is that if we're going to regenerate aspen, we're going to have to take the herbivory off. And that's happened in both cases. And the exposure data shows that. So it's a reduction. So then, which agency is going to say we're going to have to reduce the elk herd to save the aspen? That's the issue.
Sounds like the Park Service is the one from what Teresa's saying. In the back.
There's another option, and something I'd like to explore in Utah today. It's kind of a matter of scale. Do some adaptive management research to determine at what scale can we do active restoration and swamp area that we have in the rivers. We've got money in Utah to do that sort of work. We've got work in conservation and development. We've identified aspen as one of our key wildlife habitats. We're the ones spending money. I think this week coming some proposals, we
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. We know a lot about regeneration of bulls and fur on Isle Royal, where we have a simple predator-prey system. And recruitment fluctuates with the dynamics of the predator-prey system. There are long-term fluctuations. So Fred talked earlier about what temporal scale we were operating in. Okay? And this may not be a problem at all. It may be something that will resolve itself on a longer-term scale. The question is, can we afford to wait that long for it to? Because wolves are coming. Nobody have. And they're going to be here, and they're going to set up dynamics that we haven't seen before. And so you will see fluctuations. If they're simple, if you have a simple predator-prey system, it will fluctuate. And in that, you'll have pulses or aspen recruitment. These things have co-evolved for millennia. Elk and aspen have been a long time. And so you have to try to understand what model allowed recruitment in the past relative to what's happening now.
Okay. Yeah.
I wanted to add in on that, because when you were talking about developing this for a long period of time, I just did a small amount of work up in northeastern Nevada, and what I was seeing is that we know that the elk numbers haven't increased. I mean, they've only increased recently. Like 25 years ago, there was 100 elk there. So when I wasn't seeing any regeneration, like at the full age class, you know, when they're above the browse by elk and whatnot, I really wasn't looking at the impact of elk. I was really looking at past livestock. So even though now the elk are browsing, they're in a depleted situation. They're in a situation that's already kind of been, you know, set up with very little regeneration. So I think we just have to, I mean, we can keep going on about that. We have to keep including the livestock management in that, because we're not going to get anywhere.
Okay. Jess?
A question that I have, I used to be on planning and zoning in Lake County, Colorado, and we were looking at what was happening to our aspen stems over there. So this is ecological high elevation area, sometimes even higher. And everybody kept telling me there's too many elk, there's too many elk. And I never knew, what do you mean by too many? Too many for what? And are we including in that habitat fragmentation? And I have the same issue when I'm dealing with fire in the state of Colorado. Is increasingly, we're looking at, is it really in terms of, you want to say, habitat fragmentation for fire? Fire needs room to move. And here we are building right up and in areas that are disposed to either frequent fires, or if they burn, it's every 150 years, boy, it's a big one. And it's the same, it just gets at the same thing. If we want forests and we want wildlife and we want habitat, at some point we're going to have to get down to that really horrible, down-to-earth question of planning and zoning.
Yeah.
So overseas, I worked with some larger forage-related crops, and I was just wondering if you guys have any research on biological deterrent methods like pheromones or chemicals, or use honeybees and cayenne pepper spray to keep these larger herbivores out of areas. Maybe more about keep them away from areas where you're just trying to get that regeneration conversion.
Has anybody done a version for elk? I know they've done it with bear.
Shepherd he has a paper on using cayenne pepper. It works very well, but you have to apply it after every break. So it's pretty expensive.
Yeah. And I understand the hunter really do like the taste of those deer or those elk. They're great in the chili. Yes?
Talk some about the Jackson area, and I'd like to make a comment that Dale Mardos and Bob Kempner were involved in some of the earlier described burns to enhance aspen in the mid-70s, 74 areas. And we reread those treatments in 2002, and 3 of the 4 areas that they prescribed burn I would determine to be highly successful. Very dense aspen, 30 feet tall and taller, did well. The 4th area was a total failure from a regeneration standpoint because the elk did eat it. I think what I've done for 20 years in the Jackson area is try to figure out where elk are maybe not going to impact aspen in an area where aspen are starting to blink out. And focus, if we're going to spend dollars, it's a wildfire, it burns wherever it wants to go, but focus our dollars and our efforts in areas where browsing intensities don't appear to be quite as high. That may be a migration route or an area where they move through, and then we work with design seasons so that when the elk are moving to a treatment area, we hammer them pretty hard. We don't have to shoot all the elk, we just shoot at some of them, and they run like hell. They get out, and then we get too deep the snows in those transitional areas for them to go back and browse it. So I think we need to think a little bit more on beyond, there's just elk and aspen and you can't have both. I think in some areas you can, some areas you can't. We're not going to have thriving aspen stands on the south end of the National Elk Refuge with the amount of elk that are there. Now, Dale was up there, Dr. Richard Keeley was there 2 summers ago, and on the north end of the National Elk Refuge, where we winter 7,000 and sometimes 10,000 elk, we have aspen stands that are naked. We have suckers that are 14, 15 feet high. That's never happened. I don't want to say the W word, but they're there. And I don't know. Elk are not using that part of the refuge anymore for some reason. And aspen are doing pretty well. So it's a dynamic system. You just put a black line down and say you can't have elk and aspen. I think it's the wrong approach. We're smarter than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, over the side.
After listening to all this today, I wonder if we just get wolves to learn how to ride ATVs. The real question I have is it stems from a project I did with Forestry Fire and State Lands. Over a summer, we were making fire breaks, and then one day they said something different. They said, go into an aspen stand. It was I believe it was a project, maybe through Utah State or some other school, but they sent us into a small aspen stand and they said select 3 mature trees and cut everything else out. All the smaller, I guess the wording is improvement and regenerative trees were to be cut. We almost rounded up, and we weren't to touch the 2 or 3 mature ones in the center of about a 30 or 40 bar radius. Nothing outside that was to be touched. And the question I have is, have we looked at maybe different kinds of triggers for regeneration and maybe the seasons of year when those might be most effective, whether the winter or the spring or the fall, in some of these more delicate areas?
Any answers? Have we looked at triggers?
I remember reading something from a chapter that Jim Long put out in Regional Silviculture book, talking about response to harvesting being lowest if you cut middle of summer and being highest if you cut winter, spring, and fall. Of course, 70 cents, and I assume that means the same for like fruit ripping practices or things like that. But that's just stuck in the back of my head.
In Colorado, we're doing that kind of research in the San Juan National Forest. Wayne Shepard and other scientists are doing pretty similar work. I think what they're trying to address is SAD, and their hope is to find ways of getting ahead of SAD. And if they trigger the system early, perhaps it'll rejuvenate without going into decline.
Yes?
Fascinating thing a lot on the other is when you president and so that cutting will stimulate suffering as all these trees are cut down. But if you have one on it, they're just going to come in and do everything and you're going to lose the time. Same as using fire. So that's where you need to put like fence to give them some time and over to the crew. But it's just in the area.
And yet a lot of people don't want to infringe on the elk population, despite the fact that it might affect rejuvenation of that aspen forest, because they want hunter numbers to increase.
Wicked.
Yes?
This brings up an obvious question, going back to the comment about state laws. From a cutting standpoint, there's a benefit in cutting at a certain time of year or another to regeneration. What about forbidding at a certain time of year? What I'm getting at is that if you can haze the animals for a certain period of time, then the critical part, allow them to graze on the shoots and is there an opportunity to spend any research on this particular area?
Mm-hmm. Fred, do you have any idea about that one? Media talked about different nutritional values for males and females at different times of the year and that sort of thing. Has anybody really looked at that with elk?
I don't know. What you're saying is
There's been some papers done on it, for sure. There's a little bit of conflicting data. There was a paper done in Latin, and we could actually simulate clipping. And so I think what they found was that if you did combine early and mid-season, and about like 30 to 50% of the worst response, and then if you did late season only, that 50% of the highest response, and they actually put the tip in and put it starts. Is it Artis?
No, that's not that
Jones. Okay. So anyway, that's one paper. I know there's more.
Yeah, take.
But I also think there's some disagreement between some of the papers. But I also wanted to mention, I don't know how many people have done microhistory analysis on colors and stuff, but it's kind of interesting because the stuff that I've read and the work that I've done with that is, in most cases, Aspen is like 1 to 5% of the elk diet. So I don't know in these areas, like in Arizona or in Yellowstone, because I'm dealing with areas where the elk numbers are just increasing and it's just becoming a problem. But I mean, I'm curious if that changes. I'm curious if it's regional and if it's some elk. I mean, that would be one way to get it. Different elk in the U.S. and not that.
Yes.
I think it's important to look at the degrees. I mean, I'm from Nevada. We're not talking 100 or 100 elk per kilometer. We're talking much less densities. We have not seen these devastating uses on our ASPE stands. We've got animal populations. Wyoming's talking about management plans to keep an elk in relation to these management plans and whatnot. So I mean, we're talking a whole bunch of different scales and a whole bunch of densities here. And I think it's a mistake for us to sit here and look at really high densities and low densities and think that we have the same problem clear across the board. And it's incumbent upon management agencies working with everybody else to keep these elk in line with the habitat parameters that are out there. And 100 elk in the park I don't care if it was 100 white-tailed jackrabbits in there, you still have problems with that type of density of animal and that type of confinement.
Yes.
Let's start under the love thy enemy, I guess. If you want to take a look at elk and aspen, I think do it very specifically, do it very locally, and don't generalize, because you can really get yourself into a box very, very fast. So I would say that there certainly are places where elk can have just devastating consequences with their on aspects that are even on bark and introduction of disease. I've seen at the same latitude, the same elevation, soil type, 100 miles east, you can't find it. That's both with and without treatment. And so my admonishment is be careful to use generalization of this issue. And the second thing is there seems to be a lot of values in aspen. A lot of values. And I think this learning process where we can bring people together who hold the different values of aspen has a lot of potential. Because at that point you say, are there too many elk? Do we have enough aspen? Well, it comes down to the values that we either hold. In 100 years or in 1,000 years, the aspen is still in some land. Is what we want on landscape and the values we hold ecologically and as humans. That's where it's going to come down. So I think that process that you talked about is really has some great merit for local communities who are wrestling with doing that.
Okay, other comments? Yeah.
There was that one study that did sort of show that there was actually, it was only 10% less leader growth with like a 20-30% browse than without any browse. That's just one study in that.
I think, different studies, different numbers of results, different areas, things like optimism. Our objective is also that was the case actually a little different categories. So we got the STEM areas of the layers out of hypertension and at this point what we're trying to do is critical areas of defense. Those are restoring 35% oxy applied by the outside defenses and that was close to critical level. So the goal is to not necessarily expect them to happen outside of them, but we don't think it works.
So it seems that you are saying that 35% browse is associated with long-term recovery.
In our case, it's more of
For clarification, is that 35% biomass removal current year growth, the 35% hit on leaf material? Big hit.
for us, current growth.
Biomass removal current year growth.
Yeah.
I have a question for Teresa Johnson. My understanding is, Teresa, that at Rocky Mountain National Park, social science study has been conducted with, I think, visitors. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah,
Can you tell us a little bit about it? Because all I heard was that respondents were asked whether they thought elk was more important or aspen, and I think the majority said elk.
No.
Is that right?
No.
No?
No, really interesting study. He did it, I think he was the last year with that issue, and he was working with Frank and Fairley Cards, he was going to do tomorrow. That's on the next lab. So they developed a survey that they used on local level, statewide, nationwide, and actually had to give different schools to extract the results. But they developed this poster that showed sort of graphically trade-offs between elks. So you could, 4 choices you could choose. Any elk and the flourishing aspen in rural communities, or you could choose zillions of elk and grass, or somewhere between. And actually, if I'm remembering correctly, where it came out was not the one with the perfect vegetation, no, the next level up. So and there was a lot, and then they were asking the acceptability of different interactions, but we really felt that study improved our other public involvement in the community workshops. We got really strong support from the public that it's not just about the elk. And part of that was also linking the vegetation conditions to other wildlife. The elk are being bird, but there's little birds and little other things, insects that are depending on food habitat. We felt like the education, we really saw public response saying, yeah,
Okay, let me make a suggestion. This has been a great collaborative learning session. I'd like to suggest that we carry it on at Cafe Sabor. I want to just do a real quick wrap-up. I guess some of the things that I was hearing for suggestions are a way to keep elk out of regenerations, whether they be wolves on ATVs, or hunters, or harassment of some other sort, just some way to keep the elk out of the treatments. A suggestion of having treatments at such a size that they basically swamp the elk. The elk can't actually come in and eat all of the young suckers. I hear that we need to have some better understanding of the nutrient value of suckers and how wildlife and cattle are using those suckers seasonally or in other ways. I heard some suggestions about how you pick your sites for treatments. Make sure that there aren't any legacy effects going on there. Make sure that there are perhaps fewer elk or fewer cattle grazing pressures there. That is, unless, of course, the cattle or elk are learned, as does that Fred works with. And I guess another thing that I heard, being a person who works with universities and agencies to develop research projects, is that there's a lot of money available for developing large experimental treatments here in the state of Utah. So I heard that from the back of the room. The state is looking for proposals for treatments in Aspen and are willing to look at those in terms of experimental treatments. So, all right, Cafe Sabor, we're going to be starting down there in about a half an hour. If anybody needs a map, we have some of those available. Thank you very much.